It's the week ending Friday the 23rd of May, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen 2 Israeli embassy staff shot dead in Washington, D.C., Keir Starmer announcing a forthcoming U-turn on winter fuel payment cuts, and Tottenham Hotspur beating Manchester United in the Europa League final, claiming their first trophy in 17 years. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today in person, how exciting, from the Week's digital team is Harriet Marsden and Jamie Timson, and we also welcome back editor of the Week Junior, Felicity Capon.
Hello.
After what feels like years of maternity leave.
Yes, back-to-back maternity leaves.
Felicity, you are up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week, it's time to get juiced, Ollie, and I'm not talking about a green smoothie.
Basically what I did was a protocol designed by doctors, so nothing I took was illegal or banned from a legal standpoint. It was all prescribed by doctors for medical reasons.
James Magnussen, the gold medal winning swimmer, speaking to 7 News Australia on Wednesday this week. Felicity, what's the story?
The story is that this week, the Enhanced Games has had an exciting announcement. It's the brainchild of the Australian billionaire Aaron D'Souza, who basically wanted to have an Olympic-style game where everyone can dope, or, in the terminology, get juiced to the gills.
Okay, hence enhanced. So,
yes.
So games where everyone is on drugs, but they're open about it.
They're open about it. I don't think they have to say exactly what they're on, but they're allowed to work with a medical team. They can take any sort of, they're called PEDs, so performance-enhancing drugs, including steroids, which are banned by WADA in the Olympics Games. And so
what's happened this week?
This week is the announcement of the venue, which will take place in Las Vegas, and it will take place next year. And I think they've announced some of the athletes who have signed up for huge sums of money to take part in this social experiment like no other.
And are they athletes of Magnussen's calibre? So as I said, he's a gold medal winning swimmer. Are they all former Olympians?
I don't think we all know all of them, everyone who's taking part, but certainly some of the names who have been released are former Olympians, and that is seen to be a big coup of the game so far, is that they have managed to entice some of the big names. So one of them who was in the news is former Greek Olympian Christian Kolomev, and he's an Olympian swimmer, and he, as part of the announcement, he's already broken the record for the 50-metre freestyle in the swimming pool. He's been 0.02 seconds than the current record. I mean, that record...
On steroids?
We don't know what he's on because there's confidentiality, but we assume on steroids he has broken the world record.
He was also wearing this super suit, so they've had some stuff in swimming recently about what type of trunks or swimwear you can wear while you're doing it, and he was wearing the super suit that they wore to break the record, the non-juiced ones, but that super suit got banned. So there is an element of like, yes, there's the drugs enhancement, but there's also the technological, I don't know what you want to call it, but the swimwear enhancement.
Yes, well, Harriet, as Jamie is alluding to there are controversies in the actual Olympics about this sort of thing, and it's not always the case that people who aren't on drugs are the people who win. I'm trying to choose my words carefully. We know that there are people that have had to return prizes because it turned out later that they'd been enhanced, sometimes accidentally, I suppose they'd say. But nonetheless, like, they're taking stuff, and there's rules that change all the time about what they're allowed to take and what they don't. So is this that different, really, from the Olympics? It's just more honest.
Well, I do think it is very, very different because it's explicitly allowed and even encouraged. Obviously, there are some people that would argue that the Olympics is already, to a certain extent, the doping Olympics. That is an argument that has been made because of all the high profile scandals and because of all the people that have been found either on purpose or otherwise to have been taking performance enhancing drugs. But this is explicitly different in that these are games that the founder says are designed to push the human body to the limit. And so in that sense, the intention, if not possibly the outcome, the intention is very different.
Okay, so what actually do you think the real intention is? Well, is it about providing a spectacle to an audience, or is it something else involving drugs and science and superhumans?
Yeah, I mean, the bigger picture behind this, and D'Souza has himself kind of admitted this, that this is about the longevity industry, that this is a broader picture. He says that he wants to create a movement where people live longer, healthier, and most importantly, more productive lives. So he's saying that because of the falling birth rate and because of the aging population, we can't support our own population. Like not enough young people are paying taxes to support the elderly. But if, in his words, if 60 were the new 40, it would save our welfare systems. So the idea is to use this as a kind of showcase or symposium for developing these new medicines and these new treatments that would enhance longevity.
I think that's a bit of a smokescreen there. I mean, we just want to see people go faster for longer and do insane things, really. I think like that's what people want to see. That's what the spectacle is going to... We want to see if the world records can fall, basically, and that people can go faster.
Well, it's interesting, like, what's the smokescreen and what's the acceptable bit? Because you sort of said opposite things, right? So, Felicity, you feel that they might be using the drugs thing, that's the acceptable face of what they're doing, and this, as a smokescreen for what it really is, which is a spectacle. My instinct, Jamie, might be that actually the spectacle is the innocent thing. Like, actually, like, what's the difference between this and sort of a fictional sport like wrestling? If people are entertained by watching pumped up guys doing laps faster than Usain Bolt, fine. The sinister thing is, what are they using that data for? Like, what's this actually about?
And I think that one of the big questions is about what role Big Pharma's playing in this. And they're obviously able to test things that maybe potentially you wouldn't be able to test on humans in such a way. I think it's money. The investors in this are people who have made a lot of money very quickly. You can call it disruption, you can call it anything. One of the investors is Donald Trump Jr.'s hedge fund, Peter Thiel, whose name
will come up again in the show.
Yeah, and is
ex-PayPal, libertarian.
Yeah, isn't hugely a big fan of democracy, but has invested a lot of money. And I think that this is seen as a great way of, I don't see it as being that different from MMA or, like you say, wrestling or anything where it's an entertainment spectacle that they think they can make money out of. I don't know, talking about longevity, I wonder after the first event how long, once you've seen them do it, am I going to go back and back and back and back?
Well, and we know from the kind of loops that happen online, right? People want ever more extreme things once, exactly as Jamie suggested, they've seen it once. That's going to come at an actual physical cost to the participants, isn't it? This is dangerous. If you're getting your body to the point of view where you're trying to beat the record of the guy who beat the record because they'd taken the steroids.
Potentially, but I mean, it's not like no one's holding a gun to these athletes and making them do it. This is like consenting athletes who have decided to do this. There are risks to anything. There are risks in the Olympic Games. There are risks to the Tour de France. Like athletes, and I mean, the story of human history is people doing insane things. Going into space is risky, climbing Everest is risky. And like Harriet was saying, like the history of the Olympics is filled with doping. I mean, one of the things that will be really interesting to see is whether if these guys are breaking records, how close they are to the Olympians who claim that they weren't on drugs at the time. But if you look, like, probably the most famous example would be Lance Armstrong, who came back from cancer to win the Tour de France a record 7 times.
Yes.
If you take him out, you go all the way back to the 18th person in some of his races before you get to someone who was clean and was not on some sort of EPO or steroids. So this is rife, and actually this is more honest, arguably, and more transparent.
Well, except you said we can't know what medicine they're on, so it's not transparent.
Well, we know, but I mean, there are some limits. Like there are some, you're not allowed to take like illegal drugs. You can't just rock up and take your speed.
Forgive me for pointing out that would then be the limit, wouldn't it? I mean, isn't that the same as the Olympics? Like the limits are in the Olympics, you can't take any of these prohibited drugs. In this one, you can't take any illegal drugs. Clearly, some of them are going to be on illegal drugs, aren't they? Because if it helps them win, that's what they'll do and not declare it.
Well, they claim that they are about the athlete's health, and that it's like Formula One. It's the racer and the car. So this is about the athlete and the medical team and the science behind him, and they're going to work together to see what humans can do and
Harriet,
push the boundaries.
Do you see a world where these are the next role models, as Felicity suggests? Like, you want to support McLaren, you're going to support the doctor who gave the person the steroids so that she could run faster.
Unfortunately, I do see this as the future, especially of male role models, because like we were saying, that there is a huge crossover here between the male wellness space. So people like Joe Rogan and his podcast listeners, and also the MAGA movement and Donald Trump supporters. There's a big crossover here. And as Donald Trump Jr. said, that he thinks that these enhanced games are about real freedom and real competition and real American dominance, which is what the MAGA movement is about in his words. So I think there's a big crossover in terms of all the people who will be watching this and all the people who are investing in it and all the people who will be influenced by it. Like already in the male wellness space, using steroids, which, you know, have run all sorts of health risks, have been, the stigma is kind of getting smaller. Like even some MMA and jiu-jitsu leagues have kind of relaxed their doping policies. But in terms of the consent, yes, they are all consenting adults, and yes, they're consenting athletes, but this consent doesn't happen in a vacuum. They are, a lot of them, also reaching retirement age. They don't necessarily have any other ways of making money. Like the Olympics, people age out of it really, really fast.
You're frowning, Felicity.
Well, I mean, the longevity thing, I think it's actually, I feel a bit sad for athletes when they reach a retirement age of like, they're in their 20s and their 30s and they can't go any further. Yeah. So I think it's actually really nice that they get to come back and have another bite of the cherry. And I don't really lose sleep about them, you know, losing money as if there's like no other career they can make. I think they choose to come back.
But it hints at another problem in the Olympics itself, doesn't it, Jamie? Which is they're not paid very much in the Olympics. Well, they're not paid at all, are they, to enter? But then they might get a sponsorship deal or whatever. And that's sort of the issue. You do everything right, and you make other people money.
I think it's something like if you win a gold at the World Championships in the swimming, so you don't get anything for the Olympics, obviously. But if you win a gold in the World Championships in the swimming, you get something like between 10 and 20,000. I presume dollars. These people are being offered $1 million. So I don't see why you wouldn't go for that. That's a huge amount of money, and I don't begrudge any person that goes for that in that situation when the earnings are so differential. I think the interesting thing is about they're also trying to get hold of clean athletes and saying you can come and compete for money, much more money than you're earning currently, and you don't have to dope, so that we can show you how much faster you can go when you're doping. I think that's fascinating. I wonder how many clean athletes would be like, oh, maybe I can beat these guys. Because, I mean, James Magnussen was juiced to the gills and couldn't break a world record.
You keep both using this phrase, juiced to the gills. That was his quote.
That's his phrase about taking... Well, that's what he said. He said, I'd juice myself to the gills.
And so he's had a go.
He's had a go, and he's not broken a world record.
Okay, but why is he doing it already if the games aren't happening till next year?
Training. I mean, he was like talked into it from last year, and then you're training.
I think it's a marketing thing to like prove, look, like they wanted something for their big glitzy event, and they did get one. The guy you were talking about.
I think that comes back to an important misconception about doping. Like PEDs, there's so many different things out there that you can take, and steroids is only a subset of that. And I think there's this misconception that if you're taking steroids, you're not doing the work yourself, you're cheating in some way. Like, I can just lounge on the sofa all year long, then I'm going to take some steroids and I'm going to beat everyone. That's not what it is. You still have to work incredibly hard. You have to maintain a physique. The like human endeavor is still there. So they are still athletes at the highest level of their game. And a lot of the stuff that the Olympics won't let you take. I mean, some things, and the same with like UFC, for example. UFC, they won't let you have IVs, and IVs are actually good for you, but you're not allowed them because you can flush out the other drugs, all that sort of thing. So there's a huge spectrum here. It's very misleading just to think steroids, pump yourself up, look you're going to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and you're cheating. Yeah. Like, I don't think that's the case. You can be you're just enhancing your performance a lot of the time.
I think what's interesting as well is about that idea of we'll never be able to know how many people were doping, like you were saying about the cycling. Like, there's loads of people that were implicated and was never really found positive, but they were implicated in doping. I think what could happen is that you end up drawing out the dopers from the clean sport to moving to doing this kind of stuff, because they're like, well, I'm doping in this and not earning any money, but I can dope in this and earn loads.
Well, it incentivizes them, doesn't it? And that's the slightly troubling thing. It's saying, give up the life where you earn no money and then make 10 grand talking to schools about being a role model, and get $1 million for jacking yourself up.
But I go and watch quite a lot of sport, and I will go and watch sport that isn't a very high level, because I enjoy the fans or the aspect of it. So taking out the dopers and getting a much higher level of sport, maybe, you know, superhuman strength, like all of that stuff, I don't think it doesn't necessarily have to be such a bad thing for the people that are left behind, because it could still be, you know, I'm more interested in someone that's really struggled against the odds to be able to achieve it than someone that is maybe performance enhancing. But that's just me. But there are other people that maybe want to see, you know.
Okay. Up next, Robot Wars with less Craig Charles and more missiles. That's after this. Jamie, it's your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week, we found out whether it's really better to be lucky than good.
I usually don't bother, because if I am going to argue with them, I usually poke it. I'm like, okay, so do you think that NATO should be armed with squirt guns or slingshots? How about sternly worded letters? Would you like that? Would you like it if NATO they just have a bunch of guys sitting at typewriters, 1,000 monkeys writing letters to Vladimir Putin, begging him to not invade Ukraine? Our entire society exists because of a credible backstop of violence threatened by the United States and our allies all over the world. And thank goodness for it.
Palmer Luckey speaking to CBS's 60 Minutes on Monday. Jamie, briefly, who is Palmer Luckey? And then we'll return to him and what's happened this week.
Yeah, Palmer Luckey is the founder of Anduril Technologies, and he was the initial founder of Oculus, the VR headset, and he made his money 10 years ago now, sold Oculus to Facebook, made a lot of money, and has now turned to making weapons. And so that was him on CBS last weekend. But this week, there was an exclusive in The Guardian on Wednesday about the British defence review that Defence Secretary John Healey is taking in a couple of weeks. And The Guardian said that it was going to really focus on AI and the use of AI in defence. And the line that the government seemed to be taking is that the way to make the most efficient savings when it comes to the UK defence is through AI. This is obviously a benefit to people like Palmer Luckey, who his big thing is AI weapons.
Okay, so we don't know what the Defence Review is going to say. In fact, we don't even know when the Defence Review is going to be written, because it's one of these government things where they sort of tease it out, and as you say, there's a story, oh, this thing might happen. AI, bit generic. But we do kind of know that it will benefit companies like Palmer Luckey's.
Yes.
And this is the thing that is, I think, sort of surprised a lot of Americans following this interview on 60 Minutes this week as well, because people didn't realise this is happening and these weapons are already being used in Ukraine, for example. So just talk us through what AI means in extreme. It's not just about like programming surveillance systems, is it? It's about autonomous weapons.
Yeah, and autonomous weapons, it's basically saying that no humans are required. Palmer Luckey's argument, I mean, we'll go into quite how he phrases things, and there is, I think there's an element sometimes of scare tactics about World War III and about killer robots and everything that when we talk about this stuff. But what he's really saying is that there is no need now for humans to go into war, and that the US should become a kind of create autonomous weapon products. So the one that he revealed on CBS on 60 Minutes is this fighter jet basically called Fury that has no pilot. And the idea is that it would fly alongside manned ones. But they're basically, the thing about autonomous is that it will find he says it will go out, it will find a target, and it can launch a target. Now, his thing is that there is a human, that's where the human comes in, and it says, yes, this is a target, no, this isn't a target, you can shoot. But eventually, you know, they're using this AI, Luckey's company Anduril uses this thing called Lattice, which is their version of basically pulling in all the different data and using artificial intelligence to separate out what the target is and what isn't the target. And it feels like, I mean, so Luckey and the company is a disruptor. They've come in and taken on massive companies like Lockheed Martin, like big US defense companies, Boeing, and are offering, he says the big difference is that when Lockheed Martin comes to the government, they say, oh, we've got this great plan, you just have to pay us and we'll develop the weapon. And he's coming to them with actual weapons and saying, like, pay us and we'll give you this, we'll be able to sell this. So it's a massive disruption. But I think what's interesting is that, yes, it's already happening, like they're already buying stuff, but the UK government is leaning in now.
Harriet.
I think the thing that came through for me when I was researching this is that although people have this fear of killer robots, they're not remote controlled. I think that's really, really crucial to differentiate. We're not talking about that you're at home, like controlling this fighter jet.
Yeah, that's what we've currently got.
Yeah,
those are drones.
It's
this is worse. This is the Terminator.
It's not the Terminator, but
How is it not the Terminator?
It is quite close.
Immediately
Lucky
fold.
it's very, very, very clear that it is not the Terminator.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. As Jamie said, he's said, oh, there's a kill switch, or there's the final decisions made by human.
Yeah.
Doesn't it just seem like that's because that's what he has to say, because that's what people want to hear at the moment? But actually, that doesn't make it better. If you believe that the technology is clever enough to differentiate between the enemy and friendly fire, then people who believe in AI say AI is better than humans anyway.
His way of defending it as well is by basically saying, like, at the moment, drones are indiscriminate. Like they don't know the difference between a school bus of children or a legitimate target. Whereas this AI is going to be able to at least attempt to.
Or like landmines. He talks about landmines.
Yes.
Like there's nothing morally superior about having landmines, which, like you said, won't, doesn't care who it hits, rather than what he's doing, which is smart weapons. And I think his quote is, it's not a choice between no weapons and weapons, it's a choice between dumb weapons and smart weapons. One of the things he's invented is an autonomous submarine, which is really interesting because in light of John Healey, the defence minister, his review into what's going on in the UK, I read a really disturbing thing that one of our subs, HMS Vanguard, in March came back from a mission which was a record-breaking 204 days underwater. That's 130 crew who were underwater for nearly 7 months. Their supplies were starting to run out because our fleet of subs are so old that they have to spend longer in maintenance. So I thought it was really interesting that actually some of the stuff he's offering, as the UK, we're in desperate need of it. And if you want anyone making these, it's probably the US, who's just about still our ally, who's making it. Another thing is a helmet, I think, that it gives you 360-degree vision on the battlefield. That for me doesn't feel Terminator. That feels like helping soldiers in conflict.
Yes.
And I think ideally, he's making
wide range of products.
Wide range of
They're
products.
not all the same.
No, not at all.
Some of them are quite concerning, aren't they?
Some of them are concerning, but I'm just making the point that some of them I do think he's quite credible in saying that some of them I think will make the world of war a better place.
I mean, the thing that is different, Harriet, is the availability quickly. So that, Jamie was talking about this in terms of ordering 20 years ahead from Lockheed Martin or whatever. We've seen in Ukraine, haven't we? And people are predicting this is going to happen around Taiwan. Hopefully it won't, but we've seen situations where suddenly countries like ours have to scale up. And this ordering process of 20 years ago, there was a review and then they spent $1 billion on this, but then the thing's out of date because it's a tank. Actually, at least sort of agile tech companies like this make a product that year and it works.
Yeah, it's fair to say in the UK that the Ministry of Defence procurement strategy is completely out of date. We have to pivot away from these procurement decisions that take like 10, 15 years. What John Healey was saying is that we're looking at battlefield now where the lifespan of these decisions and weaponry is weeks. It's not years, it's not decades. And what Lucky says, and he repeats over and over, is China 27, which is implying what he believes that Xi Jinping wants to invade Taiwan by 2027, in which case the war games suggest that the US will run out of munitions within 8 days. So that's the kind of timeframes that we're looking at in terms of just how fast we could be overpowered. So if you've got a choice where you have one person controlling 100 fighter jets versus one person in each fighter jet, obviously that's more efficient, obviously that's faster, and obviously that's cheaper. But on the other hand, I think people's big concern is a question of accountability. So if these weapons kill unlawfully or unethically, who is accountable? Is it the machine, or is it the developer, or is it the person who's operating the system? Like the
trolley problem.
there's no real clear sense of who is fundamentally accountable for these weapons.
Absolutely. And does it dilute government responsibility if they commissioned it, never mind who designed the weapon? Like the government says, we want this thing to go into this area and kill this particular person, and it kills the wrong person. Whose fault's that?
Yeah. And I think that one of the scary things is that we know from the way that big tech has disrupted some of the things that we use every day, Uber, Deliveroo, they're not so bothered about regulation. They're not so bothered about people's lives or about whether or not it breaks the law or not.
Yeah, but they don't get taken to The Hague when they fail to deliver your pizza.
A lot of people would say that the British military is filled with humans just like that.
Yeah. No, I think that this week, they also, it was announced that, I don't know if you guys have seen the Trump Golden Dome thing.
No, go on briefly.
He's got a similar kind of idea to what Israel have, which is the Iron Dome, which is basically a way to protect,
shoot down things that are shooting at you. Yeah.
And the three companies that seem to be best placed are headed by Elon Musk, Lucky Palmer, and Peter Thiel, which is Palantir.
There's a thing.
And
so all donors to his Republican Party.
All donors to, and they're all the ones to benefit. But they are also, they have the ear of the Trump administration. They now seem to have the ear, well, or at least have support of the British government. British government have come out in support of Palantir, which is like another version of this AI company. They're another AI I would say shadowy is the only way to describe them in my mind. But they seem to, these tech giants have now got establishment, backing, and we don't really know, how it's regulated. We don't really know, at what cost that is to us, and even to go as far to say as to democracy. I mentioned earlier that Peter Thiel's not been a big fan of democracy, and I don't believe that many people in that sphere of influence really care about things like accountability or
this technology is already being used both on the UK south coast and on the US border with Mexico to detect and deter migrants trying to cross
that's
the border.
actually, regardless of what you think of the policy of, let's stop all immigrants from coming into our borders and let's do what Trump's trying to do with the wall and what Rishi Sunak tried to do, stopping the boats, etc. Regardless of what you think of the policy, it is an efficient way to have that policy, to have drones doing surveillance. That actually makes sense. But putting a gun on it is something that I think almost feels like something people should be voting for rather than something that just gets ordered. It's a completely different league of weapon, isn't it?
And I think it's quite telling that the UN Secretary General has come out against lethal autonomous weapons really strongly and said that they're politically unacceptable and morally repugnant. So there's a lot of resistance, but as Jamie said, there's also so much money involved and both the UK government and the US government both are heavily involved in both these companies. So there is also a question of the erosion of democracy. But I think one thing that Lucky says over and over again is really telling. He says his saying, "You said tech has limits." Wrong. Some people would argue maybe it should.
There's also a question of political alignment, isn't there? Jamie, you're suggesting that, maybe in the US there's something a bit corrupt and nefarious about the fact that Donald Trump's mates are getting contracts. But on the other hand, it's what he wants to do and it's a service they're offering. But from a UK perspective, most people in the UK do not like Donald Trump's politics. And you're talking about Peter Thiel, who backs JD Vance, who could well be the next president. And we would be putting our defence in the hands, it's always been closely allied to America, but it's not America, it's Trumpism we'd be putting our defence in the hands of.
Yeah, and I think people don't quite realise how much, like you said earlier, how much of this is actually already happening. We're not talking about stuff, it's like the technology is already exists on the south coast of the UK. And then you look at the NHS data contract, which was given to Palantir, to basically, the NHS, that data is probably one of the most valuable things that the government, that the country has now in terms of natural resources. And we've given Palantir a kind of 7-year, £330 million contract to help. The idea is a good one, is that we've got all this data, we need to sort it out. AI can help us sort it out to make the NHS more efficient.
Identify who's more likely to get bowel
exactly.
Or whatever the thing is.
But we've just given it over, this massive amount of data, we've given it over to this company, effectively paid them as well to have it. And there's they will say that they won't do anything with it, but the company is based around doing stuff with data. It's
they'll say they don't own the data.
Yeah, and they'll say it's
but that
just
doesn't stop them learning from it.
Yeah, I saw an interview where it was Microsoft Word doesn't own anything you write in Microsoft Word. But it's but
probably does learn how people spell things.
Yeah, and it does have access to it.
Yeah.
It's able to read what I write in Microsoft Word if you're online. It's concerning because I think for us for me at least, it feels like we're kind of sleepwalking into a situation where these people have a hell of a lot of power and say so over us and our, things like, things that are intrinsic to us, our DNA, our blood type, or things like that. And in 10, 15, 20 years time, we'll look back and be like, oh, maybe we should have had a bit more had a bit more scrutiny.
Well, also, I mean, if you're going to do real horrible kind of disaster projection, if you marry together all this data and you've got a war company, Harriet, you could kind of say, I want to go after this ethnic group. You've got all their data. You know where they live, you know what their blood type is, and the machines could go and find them and kill them.
I mean, if you look at how facial recognition software or typical tech-forward initiatives used by police or military, for example, the downstream effect of that is almost always racial profiling, high-tech racial profiling. Like, that seems to me to be the obvious endpoint here. If you're having, and as we said, Lucky is kind of obsessed with this idea of China invading Taiwan in 2027, how to what extent is it likely that you could use all of these data sources that you have to train these weapons to be particularly targeting certain ethnic groups, for example? It's not beyond the realms of imagination. It already happens in the police force. It already happens in the military, to a lesser extent. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's always such a tension between the drive for efficiency and consideration of ethics.
Yeah, and also it's not about just what the US would do, is it? It's what the other countries they'd sell this technology to might do.
What Israel would do, for example,
right,
because Israel's already using semi-autonomous weapons. The British military is already using AI-enabled models in Estonia, for example. Like these weapons are already out there and they're already being used, and you can't legislate for who uses them how.
But then I suppose Israel would argue to that. If we could go after the leader of Hamas that we want, then that would stop all of this killing on the way, because we'd know the machine would know exactly who they're going after. There'd be less risk.
Does that sound credible to you?
Well, does it sound scary is the point, isn't it, Felicity? Like, if as the victim of a war crime, if that happens to you, I suppose when a person is pulling the trigger, at least there's been that sense in the past of that was someone's son or daughter and they got dragged into it too. Other lives have been ruined. Whereas you'd just be on the end of a government vengeance policy, wouldn't you, if that had happened to your family and it was a mistake?
Yeah, but I mean, I think the idea is that you could, I mean, certainly with Palmer Lucky's idea is that he would have fewer US personnel going into conflict in the first place. So if you can have less lives at stake because there's tech doing it for you. The other point he makes is that he thinks take this as you will, but autonomous weapons will actually promote peace, a bit like nuclear weapons, because some of these countries are going to be so jacked up on crazy AI tech that other countries won't go anywhere near them. And like, if you think about nuclear, like India and Pakistan, they both have nuclear weapons, and that whole recent thing on Kashmir, they didn't use them. Israel is a nuclear state, I believe. I assume Russia is, and actually they haven't been used. So it could be a similar sort of thing where the weapons are so insane, they're so formidable that actually people are more peaceful.
But Lucky also said he wants the US to go from being the world police to the world gun store. And a lot of people would argue that that doesn't necessarily sound better. Like, obviously, from a protectionist US point of view, the public might be more pro getting involved in conflicts abroad if they're not sending their own people. Like, that is definitely legitimate. But is that necessarily a good thing?
But it goes back to my point, like, there's always going to be conflict. There are always going to be terrible wars. It's just about how we fight them. And the British Army is in such a dire state when you look at it. Like, it's absolutely terrifying. I'm sure every single person in the US Army, in the UK Army, is crying out for some of these things to come to our shores and boost our army, because otherwise, if there is a war, we're kind of screwed. On
that cheerful thought, up next, would you swipe right on a right winger? That's after this. Harriet, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Nobody wants to date a Tory.
The difference between left and right, especially on campus and all that, does make dating difficult, in my opinion.
Especially on Hinge profiles, you've got your political views. You put like conservative, you put like reform, and anything far right. They look at you differently.
When you see the liberal woman over here, I mean, just being a man, they're going to look at you and think you're racist or whatever, because that's just the assumptions they make.
I understand freedom of speech, but I don't want to interact with anyone I think is a racist.
Some right-of-centre university students sharing their thoughts with Politics Joe on politics and dating on Tuesday. Harriet, what's the story?
Well, it turns out that people on dating apps are less likely to swipe right on a conservative voter than they are on a reform voter. So this new study by the University of Southampton found that people were more likely to swipe right further to the left or right of where they are. Right. So Conservative voters were more likely to swipe right, further to the right on a Reform voter. Okay. And then Labour, Lib Dem and Green voters were all more likely to be chosen. So altogether, the Conservatives kind of came out on the bottom of the pile of all the different voting types in this study.
Okay, and what does that tell us about the world, Harriet? Why is this important?
Well, the suggestion by the study researchers is that the extreme, in particular the extreme right, has become more normalized. But also I think the broader picture here is a question of the political polarization and the kind of creep of politics and division into people's personal lives, into people's dating lives, and the fact that now algorithmically on dating apps, you're sorted into ideological piles. And I think the most interesting thing to come out of it was that it's not necessarily to do with common ground. Like you would think, oh, okay, surely you want to date people with kind of similar views to you. It's not really about common ground. What they found was that people were more likely to go more extreme than they were to cross the political divide. So it's more like alignment as opposed to having things in common.
Yeah. Okay. All of that's very interesting. So we'll get into all of that. But I suppose I should just say on behalf of anyone listening who votes Reform, most Reform voters wouldn't say they're extreme right, would they? I suppose that any more than a Green Party would say they're extreme left. Maybe this is just that the Conservatives are at a pretty low ebb at the moment. And so, there is just a bit more traction behind Reform on dating apps as there is in the polls.
Yeah, you could see it as another Reform is getting a bump story.
Exactly.
I think it's more to do with the Conservatives are doing really, really badly. Yeah. Because obviously, in terms of...
But it doesn't mean no one wants to date a Conservative, is what I'm saying.
In terms of the demographic...
It just means that maybe there aren't that many people declaring themselves as voting Conservative.
It does mean that people are less likely to swipe right on a Conservative on a dating app, because dating apps, the demographic already skews young and it skews overwhelmingly liberal, which is to say that if you're putting Conservative on your dating app profile, you are already effectively just putting yourself at the bottom of the pile anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good tip for anyone listening who actually does vote Tory. Don't say how you vote on the app. I mean, there's something a bit sad about this to me, Felicity, but maybe I'm just old-fashioned on this. I quite like the idea that when you meet your partner, whether it's online or in real life, you might actually have different ideas about politics and learn from each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been kind of popular to say I wouldn't date a Tory, and all those mugs and T-shirts, never kissed a Tory. I mean, they've been going on for ages, and they're just pathetic, really, aren't they? I definitely agree. I think it's a really worrying sign.
Jamie's fuming in the corner. Yeah. He's never kissed a Tory jumpsuit.
Yeah. It does as if well. Yeah. I think it's a really worrying sign of how young people are going out looking for love, really, because it's you're not trying to find someone who has the exact same set of beliefs as you. It's not like playing The Sims. You don't get to design your future partner and then go out and find them.
So 90s at the moment. I love it.
I love the 90s. It's the whole point is that you kind of have to muddle along with people and get to know them and all that sort of thing. And also the other thing about
burbling with disagreement
the
already.
other thing about long-term relationships and marriages, if you're in it for the long haul, is that people change.
Yes.
Like, I hate to tell you that. So you might go for
people tend to get more right wing as they get older, don't
exactly.
they? So they could end up as Conservative if they were Labour.
I went for a Labour person. Yeah. But in our 40s they were Radical, in their 50s they were Green. Like, you don't know what's coming.
Yeah.
So you better buckle up for that.
Yeah, but I mean we're talking about dating apps. We're not talking about dating, and obviously the reality of 2025, the dating landscape, although fewer people are using dating apps than before, that is the reality. We're not blaming people and young people for this. We're blaming the dating apps that force you to identify yourself as a political.
But do you have to do that? It's a long time since I've been on apps.
Yeah, this is where it gets different, because you haven't seen just how politicized dating apps are.
Are you on dating apps at the moment, Harriet? I'm not advertising your services. I'm just saying you have direct experience of this.
For the purposes of research for this story. Uh-huh. And they are overtly politicized in so many ways. You can decline to put your political persuasion, but then there's a big old blank, which is in itself a political decision.
People would then fill with their imaginations.
You can decline to put your vaccination status, but then I'm immediately going to assume that someone isn't vaccinated.
You're the kind of person who doesn't want to put your vaccination status.
It has become, because of the way that prompts and dating apps are designed and set out now, it has become almost impossible to opt out of defining yourself overtly from the start. Like, this is where the problem is.
Which is so wrong.
That said, Jamie, I suppose the counter-argument to all of that is, we've had like Guardian dating for 40 years, right? There's been the private ads in the back of Private Eye, and the classifiers are sort of aimed at a certain type of person. The Telegraph.
From the 90s to the 60s.
Yeah. So actually, I mean, people in real life used to meet, at church. They'd have something in common.
Yeah.
That's normal, isn't it? A film club. So actually, all you're doing is saying, these are the things I'm interested in.
Yeah. I wonder if maybe also the Tories, among young people, just will have their own dating app. There's so many dating apps that there's probably
I'm sure
there's a right wing, or not right wing, centre right. There's probably a Toffs R Us type dating app situation. So I wouldn't be. Yes, my heart.
They did knock me up. I was trying to do a pun and I can't think of
Yeah,
one.
I was thinking there's something about Tinder, but I couldn't get it.
Yeah.
Anyway, So I don't worry so much.
Tory Tinder.
I don't. Yeah. I don't worry so much about the future romantic prospects of young Conservatives more than I do about any other party. But I do think that I probably still agree that, yes, there's an element of wanting to meet people and have your views change, and people's views change as they get older. I think I probably agree with Harriet in that, I don't necessarily think the first thing you need to know about someone is how they voted. I would love to think that you could get to know someone and that become something that you talk about later on down the line.
Yeah.
The fact that it has to come out straight away, I think, is unnecessary. For people prejudge people all the time, and that's one of the biggest issues I imagine in dating, but across society. And part of that is politics.
There is another element to this, Harriet, which I know you're interested in because we were talking about it before, which is that for women in particular, when you're evaluating which men you might want to go on a date with, if you're talking about a heterosexual couple, there is the element that someone who votes more to the right is more likely to be involved in some of the radical manosphere stuff and therefore might be less safer person to be with. That would be unfair to a lot of people who vote Conservative, but that might be what people are thinking.
No, there is, I think, a huge risk factor assessment here. It's already an incredibly risky endeavor to give your personal information, your phone number, your full name, and go out on a random date with someone that you've never met. That's a massive risk for women. If you, in particular, I'm just thinking of the US context here in particular, where nearly half of all women polled have said they wouldn't date someone who had voted for the other side, the implication being usually who had voted for Trump. There is an argument that you are more likely to encounter views that might coincide with anti-reproductive rights, or views that coincide with the manosphere or misogynistic influences like Andrew Tate in particular, more likely to encounter that with someone that has overtly chosen the very political, because it is political, a decision to put your a Conservative voter or a Reform voter. If you know that it is going to penalise you algorithmically, you are making that decision. You've not just sort of lied and said Liberal, you've not just sort of lied and said not political. So yeah, there is a risk factor there. And for me personally, when I'm looking at these profiles, not intentionally, but certainly subconsciously, I'm going to be asking questions about the type of man who would decide to penalise themselves algorithmically in this way in order to state so aggressively that they're a Reform voter.
I think most men probably penalise themselves algorithmically just by putting a terrible photo, don't they?
To be fair, we should be really, really, really careful about different. We can't conflate the US and UK political landscapes here at all. But I'm certainly going to I'm going to think twice about that. I'm not necessarily saying that would be an absolute no, but then also on the other side, I'm also incredibly put off by what I increasingly see as really aggressive anti-Toryism. There are so many prompts where you'll see would never date a Tory, don't talk to me if you ever voted Conservative, don't there's so much politicization of dating apps now. It goes so far beyond just saying who you voted.
There is an analogy with America in the sense that the kind of the old school Republicans now feel homeless, don't they? And in that way, if you're a kind of Cameroonian Conservative, maybe you vote Labour now, maybe so you just say Labour, but actually if you feel like you wouldn't vote Reform, but you can't say who you'd actually vote for, you work in the city, but you're liberally progressive. What do you put? Do you just not say what you really think about politics because you're worried that people will think you're Nigel Farage?
There are a lot of Tories in Cameroon.
How you were brewing that joke for 20 seconds and still thought it was worth talking over Felicity for.
I balk at the idea that, I think UK and US completely different kettle of fish. I balk at the idea that Reform is the radical right linked to the manosphere, really worrying, really dangerous. And I think the Overton window has shifted. I think reform, just look at the recent council elections, look at how well they're doing. I think reform are becoming more palatable. I think they are becoming mainstream. I think the idea that we still exist in a two-party political system is completely wrong and completely dead. I think the Tories are done. So I think the idea that we're talking about reform and they're so extreme and they're so far out that you wouldn't go anywhere near them in the barge pool is really, really wrong. In terms of, and this is what Farage has been doing. He's a master manipulator. He's a brilliant politician. He has been working for decades to make reform palatable. He looks at Giorgia Meloni in Italy and sees what she's done there, and he has brought issues like immigration back to the fore. And that's not it's not necessarily an extreme view. That's what a lot of ordinary people in this country are concerned about. And when you look at him on social media, he's the most followed politician on TikTok with 1.2 million followers. During last year's general election campaign, Reform generated 3 times more social media interactions than Labour. They're on social media where, the idea that these dating apps, they skew left, they skew young. Reform is occupying that space. Lots of increasingly, lots of normal, decent.
That's not true. What Harriet said is true. The majority of people still are.
But I still think it's really misleading to suggest that they're like these far right chauvinistic extremists who you wouldn't go anywhere near, because you're not listening to what's going on in this country, if that's what you're saying.
It's about, what I'm saying is that not this study in particular, actually, because this study in particular, women were just as likely to pass on Reform or Tories as men were. But in other studies, in one huge OkCupid study earlier this year, they found that 6 out of 10 women worldwide would want to date someone with the same political views as them. That was significantly more than men. So you've got to be wondering why. Is there a perception that there is a bigger personal cost if, as a woman, you're dating someone with different political views? You're not necessarily talking about dating someone who disagrees with you on fiscal policy or disagrees with you on immigration policy. You might be talking about someone who disagrees fundamentally on your bodily autonomy or your access to reproductive rights.
Well, maybe you can convince them, have a conversation, get to know them, and show them why they're wrong.
But if let's say I, as a person using a dating app, was swiping through 100 different men to go on a date with, why would I choose the one where that's come up in my mind when I can choose 99 that haven't said that? Just mathematically, why would I not do that pre-sorting, just in terms of efficiency?
Have any of you ever met partners online, though?
I met my husband on a dating app.
There we go.
I love dating apps. I'm still on them. No, I'm not. I'm not.
You would not say that if you were on them in 2025, let me tell you that. I actually once, this is where I wish that they had been more overt about their political leanings, because I had been seeing this guy very, very casually for just a little bit of time, and so we weren't really having a lot of deep political conversations, but it did come out quite early on that not only was he what at the time was a Brexit Party voter, he was standing as a candidate for the Brexit Party in central London. In central London, as an El Salvadorian immigrant, no less. So I would have liked to know that off the bat. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Jamie, did you meet your...
No, but I know I've got loads of friends that are in very successful relationships from online dating, but I do agree that they were probably all pre-2018, 2019.
Yeah, it used to be better.
Yeah. In the 90s. Everything was better in the 90s.
It is it's like a war zone with autonomous weapons now.
Yes. Autonomous dating is the next thing, isn't it? You'll just get matched up with someone that you have no choice over, I presume, because the computer has selected it for you from an algorithm.
Says yes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, my thanks to Harriet, to Jamie, and to Felicity. Here's a great thing you can do with technology. You can follow this show. Just press follow on your podcast app of choice, and you'll get every episode as soon as it's released. If you prefer to type things in with your finger, look for The Week Unwrapped. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription. That's like turning the internet off. Go to theweek.com/subscriptions. You do need the internet to do that. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Ollie Peart at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.